we have been focusing on this now for several days, and joining us right now is James Cameron, diver, explorer, director of The Abyss, a deep-sea thriller, and most famously, of course, Titanic as well as many other great films. James, I appreciate you joining us. Someone who's devoted his life to exploration as you have in many ways under the sea. I'm wondering what is going through your mind tonight.
Well, thanks, Anderson. I mean, obviously, we're all kind of heartsick from the outcome of this. And I've been living with it for a few days now, as some of my other colleagues in the deep submergence community. I was out on a ship myself when the event happened on Sunday. The first I heard of it was Monday morning. I immediately got on my network because it's, you know, a very small community in the deep submergence group, and found out some information within about a half hour that they had lost comms and they had lost tracking simultaneously. The only scenario that I could come up with in my mind that could account for that was an implosion, a shockwave event so powerful that it actually took out a secondary system that has its own pressure vessel and its own battery power supply, which is the transponder that the ship uses to track where the sub is. So I was thinking implosion then. That's Monday morning. I got on the horn again with some other people, tracked down some intel that was probably of a military origin, although it could have been research, because there are hydrophones all over the Atlantic, and got confirmation that there was some kind of loud noise consistent with an implosion event. That seemed to me enough confirmation that I let all of my inner circle of people know that we had lost our comrades, and I encouraged everybody to raise a glass in their honor on Monday. Then I watched over the ensuing days this whole sort of everybody running around with their hair on fire search, knowing full well that it was futile, hoping against hope that I was wrong, but knowing in my bones that I wasn't. And so it certainly wasn't a surprise today. And I just feel terrible for the families that had to go through all these false hopes that kept getting dangled, you know, as it played out.
I just wanted to. You said it was on Monday that you learned of these listening devices under the water had picked up the sound of an implosion, or what was believed to be an implosion.
Yeah, that's as it came to me. Now that's hearsay, multiple. You know, they were credible sources, right. So, you know. I took that as a factor that I multiplied in with the other factors, and I couldn't think of any other scenario in which a sub would be lost where it lost comms and navigation at the same time and stayed out of touch and did not surface. I was also told, and I don't have confirmation on this, that they were on descent. They were a couple hundred meters above the seafloor, and they dropped their weights. Now, the only way for the ship to know that they had dropped their ascent weights, which would be an emergency abort, is if they had called that in, that they were ascending. So I believe now that they had some warning, that they heard some acoustic signature of the hull beginning to delaminate. An investigation will hopefully eventually show what did happen, because we all need to know as we go forward. The deep submergence community needs to know exactly what happened.
You've made dozens of, just extraordinary deep water expeditions, including more than 30 to the Titanic itself. You've also gone far deeper than the 13,000 feet where the Titanic is. I think you've gone deeper than just about anybody into the ocean. I wrote it into, I forgot the name of the place you went, but the Challenger Deep, which is just extraordinary.
Deep, yeah.
You went in your own design. Yeah, you went in your own designed craft that's a submersible that was experimental and didn't go through the sort of the standard safety protocols. But
correct.
The difference is you were not taking passengers on board. Would you ever have taken passengers on board a submersible that had not gone through the standard maritime safety protocols?
No, not at all. I mean, my sub that I went to the Challenger Deep dove safely 3 times deeper than Titanic. We made multiple dives in that sub. That sub was a single-seater, and it was only contemplated that myself and the engineer with whom I co-designed the vehicle would be the only pilots of that sub, and we worked on it for 7 years. We knew every detail of it intimately. I was involved in every phase of the testing, so I assessed the risks, and I understood them very well, and those were risks I was willing to take. I would never take it upon myself to ask someone else to take that type of risk. And if I were designing a multi-seat vehicle where I intended to be the pilot, we'd go through all of the rigorous test protocols and review protocols that you have with, let's say, ABS, which is the American Bureau of Shipping, or DNV, or German Lloyd's, who are the major bureaus that class a sub. They call it classing, but it's basically certification. And I think it was unconscionable that this group did not go through that rigorous process.
What is, this was an experimental design. There's no question about it. It's a carbon composite. You can tell us more about what that actually means. I mean, it's the kind of stuff used in spacecraft, but is it designed for deep underwater pressure? And what is the danger of that kind of material in this kind of environment?
It's completely inappropriate for a vessel that sees external pressure. Carbon fiber composites are used very, very successfully for internal pressure vessels, like, let's say, a scuba tank. And you can get 2 or 3 times multiple of what you could get out of steel or aluminum for that type of pressure bottle. But for something that's seeing external pressure, all of the advantages of composite materials go away and all the disadvantages come into play. So if you're using a uniform material like steel or titanium or ceramic or acrylic, you can do computer modeling with a high degree of accuracy and confidence. The second you start doing carbon composite or any kind of composite materials, you're introducing 2 materials that are in contact with each other. The filament itself and then the epoxy matrix that it sits within. And at that point you have degradation failure. So we always understood that this was the wrong material for submersible hulls, because with each pressure cycle, you can have progressive damage. So it's quite insidious, because you may have a number of successful dives, which is what happened here, and then have it fail later. If I were diving in a sub that was fully certified, I wouldn't think about it. But even in my own sub, which had a steel hull, I knew that if I dove several 2 or 3 times, it was probably good to go, because you could cycle steel hundreds of times, if not thousands of times. But that's not the case with composites. So it's quite insidious, and that, I think, lulled them into a sense of confidence and led to this tragedy. But these are known things. They're known within the engineering community.
Well, we also want to point out OceanGate's former director of marine operations. He wrote this engineering report in 2018, I think it was. He focused his criticisms on the company's decision to rely on acoustic monitoring the sounds the hull made under pressure, as opposed to a scan of the hull. According to him, the company claimed no equipment existed that could perform that kind of a scan on the 5-inch thick carbon fiber hull.
Yeah.
I know it's difficult to say, obviously, without reading the report, but I'm wondering what you make of that, because it seems like this company was making a big deal about the sensors they had that could, sense a problem with the hull, and if they could sense there was a problem, then they would have time to turn around and go back up. Clearly, they didn't.
It's a bit like saying we have a bit of a poor design for the engine in our jet or our rocket ship, but we have a sensor that will tell us if it's on fire. To me, that's called comfort, and I think that if you're building a hull where you need to have sensors to tell you that it's failing, in the process of failing, you have no business designing subs or being in that sub. They touted it, I believe, as a good thing, as a safety protocol, but I consider it a bad thing, because it sheds a light directly on the fundamental flaw of their design. You have to remember, the DNA of this design concept goes back farther. It goes back to the quest to go to the Challenger Deep that I was involved in, obviously. And there was another sub design that was competing with ours at the time that was based on a wound filament composite cylinder with 2 titanium end caps. And I told those guys point blank, you're going to get killed in that thing. And they ultimately never dove it. I literally told the guy who bought the sub, when its owner, Steve Fawcett, the famous billionaire, died in a plane crash, and the sub was then purchased by another guy to operate it. And I told him, you're going to die down there if you dive that thing. And I felt very strongly about it. I had nothing to do with OceanGate, and I never tried to warn Stockton Rush of the same thing, because I thought maybe they've solved it, But I was pretty opinionated about it at the time, and they had a similar idea of doing acoustic sensors to, they call it delamination, when water ingress starts to force the layers of the fibers apart, and theoretically you can hear it. I actually believe they heard it with their ears, not through the sensor system, in the last moments of their lives, and that's quite a horrifying prospect.
James Cameron, if you could just stay with us, we're going to take a quick break. I'd like to continue the conversation. If you can, later also we'll have more on Titan's development, and especially the selling of it, as James was just saying, is a safe way to experience the deep. We'll be right back.
For the commercial.
Back now from St. John's, Newfoundland, where the submersible Titan first went out to sea on its way to the Titanic. We're talking tonight about the 5 lives lost, also about the vessel itself and the questions surrounding it, namely the decision to build it out of carbon composites and not certified safety as other such vessels are. Back now with Deep Sea Explorer and Titanic director James Cameron. I mean, it's extraordinary to me that this debris field is just 1,600 feet away from the bow of the Titanic. Obviously, people think about the bow of the Titanic and they think of your film Titanic with that iconic scene on the bow. I heard you earlier to kind of talk about these two captains and kind of a similarity that you see, and I'm wondering if you could talk about that.
I think there's a great, almost surreal irony here, which is Titanic sank because the captain took it full steam into an ice field at night on a moonless night with very poor visibility, after he had been repeatedly warned by telegram, by Marconigram, by radio, during the day, that that's what was ahead of him. And so I think we're also seeing a parallel here with unheeded warnings about a sub that was not certified, where the entire deep submergence community actually, or not the entire community, but a large number of them got together to write a letter to OceanGate, the company, and say, we believe that this could lead to catastrophe. It was less a criticism of the engineering than of the process, but it contemplated the fact that the engineering probably wouldn't pass muster from a certification bureau. And so they were trying to head this whole thing off. It was our worst nightmare. I mean, all of us in the deep submergence community, people like myself that pilot subs and design subs, implosion is obviously the specter that looms over us all the time. But because of that, that's the thing that you engineer for the most, years in advance. So that should never be the problem. I've never believed that if I was, going to have a serious problem in a sub, that it would be implosion. Maybe entanglement in a fishing net, maybe a fire from the electronics. Hard to rule those things out. Implosion, absolutely not. Especially with modern finite element analysis and, computer-aided design.
What should be what should we learn from this? Because obviously, deep water exploration. I mean, there's a pretty great. I mean, I don't know if it's great, but a very good safety record with people who have done the certification, people who have really studied this. Do you worry about this having an impact on the continued exploration?
I do. Look, I'm not worried about exploration because explorers will go. And I'm not worried about innovation because people will innovate. I'm worried that it has a negative impact on, let's say, citizen explorers, tourists, but these are serious people with serious curiosity, willing to put serious money down to go to these interesting places. And I don't want to discourage that. But I think that it's almost that now the lesson, the takeaway is, make sure if you're going to go into a vehicle, whether it's an aircraft or a surface craft or a submersible, that it's been through certifying agencies, that it's been signed off. Every day we trust our lives to engineering. We step into an elevator. We make an assumption that somebody somewhere has done the math properly and it's all been certified properly. We should take the same precautions when we get into a submersible. Even if it's at a resort and we're only going down 300 feet or 1,000 feet. I'm a partner in a submersible company called Triton. I'll say that up front. Triton, not Titan. And Triton has a perfect operational safety record across 20 vehicles and 10,000 hours of people diving to depths up to 1,000 meters. It can be done, but it requires rigor. And I think all of us in the community now now that our worst fears have happened, and we know why it happened, I think largely, it puts us now on even more alert to be disciplined and to really think about the ethics of it. There's a lot of countries where subs are diving all over the world. You're not going to have regulation everywhere that solves this problem. It's really more that we have to just accept a standard of practice that we don't encourage operators to work without proper, ABS or German Lloyd's or whatever it is certification.
The Coast Guard Rear Admiral today was talking about the unforgiving environment at those depths. Can you just talk about that feeling of being down there? I mean, I can't believe how deep you have gone into the ocean, 3 times deeper than the Titanic, I think you said.
Yeah.
What is that feeling of being down there?
Well, I always say you'd have to take a backhoe with you to go deeper than I went anywhere on this planet. That is a feeling of remoteness. I knew when I made that dive that there was no hope of rescue. There literally was no vehicle in the world, no matter if you could fly it in, no matter if I could survive long enough on my life support system. There was no rescue. I had to self-rescue if I had a problem. And we thought about that for the 7 years that we spent building the sub. And I designed a lot of the safety systems myself, knowing I was going to be in that sub, in terms of how to drop the weights. If I was incapacitated, the weights would drop themselves after a certain period of time. Many communications beacons for when I got back to the surface. If I had drifted off someplace, I'd have been picked up by satellite. They would have reported my position. I had radio. I had visual beacons. It wouldn't have required an aircraft search. They'd have found me pretty quickly. So you think all that stuff through, but the feeling in the moment, it's almost a sacred space. It's a place where there's nobody else there. It's just you and yourself, and a sense of deep time. You're looking at something that no one's ever seen. It's been that way for hundreds of millions, if not billions of years. At Titanic, it's different. You feel the presence of the tragedy. And I think that's the lure. I think that's why people want to go and experience it for themselves, to remember history. I think people go to battlefields, to Gettysburg, to, Normandy Beach, and all those things to remember history and to take it in and make it part of their lives. And I don't think that's, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I mean, some people don't like, they say it's a grave site and that sort of thing. But I think it's important for us to remember. But here's a case starkly today where the collective we didn't remember the lesson of Titanic. These guys at Ocean Gate didn't, because the arrogance and the hubris that sent that ship to its doom is exactly the same thing that sent those people in that sub to their fate. And I just think it's heartbreaking. I think it's heartbreaking that it was so preventable.
Well, James Cameron, I'm sorry we're talking under these circumstances, but I appreciate the level of detail and expertise that you bring to the conversation, so thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Anderson. It's been a pleasure.